Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to talk to y'all about some more stories. My wife tells me that I tell too many stories, but I like to tell stories. My grandfather was able to tell this one story after another without ever telling the same one twice, and he was really good at it. But anyway, I figured I'd just jump into a few more stories and some observations and stuff like that. And I was noticing whenever I was one day walking across the lot of the grocery store, and this guy just fell in beside me. I was wearing this uniform here, and y'all been busy, and I says, well, not really. It's a little slack this time. It was, time for the peanut festival and all that. And the guy says, well, hadn't there been some fenders and wrecks and stuff on the bypass? I said, well, yeah, well, that's body shop stuff. I don't do that. He thought that's what he was talking about, because people didn't read the patches on my shirt. They just looked at the general and they thought I was a cop. In this uniform here, this little kid, and this was right at 11, his mother left him and his sister in this dining room building while she went next door to get the food. It was an odd setup in a little town. And that little boy said, "You're in charge." And the little girl said, "Why do you have to look?" And I said, "I'm not looking after anybody. I'm just waiting for my food like y'all." And that little boy says, "You're the fire." Well, I was wearing a red shirt, and he thought I was a fireman. Of course, I didn't have any patches for him to read. Shirt. I had people mistake me for a paramedic. It's just really something. I don't look at what's on the shirt. They just see this image of somebody with, stuffed shoulders or on their I guess because of that ASC patch or something like that. It was to me how those uniforms trip people up. Now, talking about uniforms, on this training, I went to Louisiana. The service manager says this is a 2-day school, so I went down there with one change. And I drove down there wearing my uniform because when I had to leave, I had to go to work and then leave and drive down to Covington, Louisiana, because there was a Chrysler training to go to. And it was a basic electrical school, but we had just bought the franchise. We had bought the Jeep Renault franchise, and then Chrysler bought Jeep. I had to go down there and go to everybody they wanted to be trained. They wanted to be able to go to the electrical class, and I'd been to basic electrical with Volkswagen and Mazda and GM and everybody else. And I said, well, let's just go on down there. So went down there, and it was on a Monday. Monday afternoon, I think. Anyway, he was telling me what they were going to be covering. One way or another, I drove my uniform on a Sunday night, or a Monday night, I'm sorry, changed into my civilians, went to school the next day thinking that I was going to just be there for a day and a half. And then I found out it was going to be last all the way through the rest of the week. And so, good grief, I had to call the service manager. I didn't bring enough money, and I only got one change of clothes. I had to wash my uniform and put it on to go to the next day, because in there, and all of these 12 guys that run the class saw all these silly patches on my shirt. The surgery was all about keeping our credentials on our shirts, so we would look official. And so when all those patches on my shirt, it was kind of dumb, because most mechanics know that patches don't mean much, but these guys thought I was some kind of a guru. But what was amazing to me in that school, and a couple of things, that guy, and I went 2 or 3 times down there, that guy was trying to teach us electrical class that resistance doesn't make heat. And I thought, and all these other guys with their eyes at him saying, what is he talking about? And he was a young guy, and I don't think he'd ever fixed a car, but he worked with Chrysler. And I said, and I took him to task on that. I said, that's stupid. They make resistors out of ceramic. And I've never seen resistance that didn't make heat of some kind. If it's current flowing and there's resistance, there's going to be heat. And he finally had to back off of that and say, oh, well, that does make heat. I can't believe he even made that statement. It didn't make any sense. But another thing I had problems with, dropped F-bombs whenever he wanted to get a laugh out of the class. And whenever Chrysler sent me that evaluation form for that class, I says, this guy uses foul language. I don't know if you want her to be represented by somebody in the school that drops F-bombs everywhere just because he wants to giggle. And the next time I went down there, he didn't use a single foul word whatsoever. I guess they call ask for that. It's really something how you know, comedians that want to get a laugh out of somebody will use all language to get people to laugh because they're afraid they won't be funny if they don't, you know. Picture I took of my hand holding an impact wrench, and I call that one Gunsmoke, you know. And I was, when I said, posted it on Facebook, my cousin, he said, yeah, but you couldn't hit a broadside of a barn with that thing. But you know how our hands like that whenever we're handling that greasy stuff all day, every day, and you got to use those brushes, just garbage from your fingernails and everything, and cleaning it from under them with a knife or something doesn't ever quite get them quite clean. So I usually just kept mine clipped real short, you know. This was my lunch buddy for 15 years. His name was Alan Cobb, and we went to Doc's Country Store for as long as it was open. And this was the dining room. And the day that I retired, they fed me a ribeye steak, and I got a cake here, which I couldn't eat any of because I, you know, got a little blood sugar problem. And there was that was just a little picture that the waitress took of me because it was going to be the last. You know, this was in May of 2019 when I retired. But about after that, that store burned to the ground. Something, it caught fire in the middle of the night for some reason or other now. So it's really, I miss that. This was cool because he had a train that would run all the way around this shelf up here. And each one of these little glass jars, lamps and all that kind of stuff, I know telling how much they're worth. He had all kinds of cool stuff in there. Anyway, I was at the trade show up in Kansas City. Well, KC Vision, and I thought this GT40 was just gorgeous that I had sitting there, and so who's next to it? Well, somebody took my picture there. Bobby, one of my previous students, came to the show with me. He came from north of there, I think an hour somewhere, and he met me there because he found out I was going to be there. And this is where I first knew Henrik. I went in 2010 to the Craig Van Battenberg Hybrid School and broke us up into teams. And I was the team leader for our particular team. And it's kind of funny when Craig says, everybody himself, you know, and I went as an instructor for the college where I taught auto mechanics. And 16 guys in the room, and Craig says, introduce yourself. And so everybody introduced themselves, and I says, I teach auto mechanics at such and such a college down in South Alabama. He says, and what? And I said, and I don't understand what you want. He goes, and you write for Motor Age. So I didn't even think about that, you know, but Craig apparently, you know, wanted me to add that to my resume. But I picked Joey. I didn't know Joey at the time, but I did notice later that whenever Joey's mouth to say something in that class, every one of these people would listen to him. Joey owns aetools.us, and if you want any kind of scan or any kind of stuff, I don't care if it's OEM or whatever, aetools.us is a place. And I've bought several things from them, and if you buy something from them, they give you free support forever. It's just really amazing what he does. They're up in Olathe, Kansas, and he's a really, really, really sharp guy. And I saw amazing stuff when I was down there at the school. There was a hybrid battery that they had come out of. They had bricked the controller on it, you know, the battery controller. And so he hooked up his IDS laptop, and he opened a little routine on the side, and he ran a scan of all the modules. And when it came to that module, he dragged his finger down that little list of all of those module protocols. He got the protocol for that module, and somehow he went in through the back door and rescued that module, woke it up, brought it back to life, and he had the and everything that he had access to those too, and all. I was thinking, this guy's a special dude, man. But anyway, this guy had a PhD. He was a mechanic. This guy right here was the wrench man. I was kind of the team leader, you know. But anyway, we had a lot of fun. And this is at KC Vision. This guy had got more ASE certifications on everything ASE can certify you on. I don't except parts. than any other person on earth. And he's got a shop in Africa, and his name is Tar Suera. And this is Jerry Truglia, you know him. And Joey, again, down there at the trade show. But anyway, that was at KC Vision. He wanted to take this guy watches my videos, and he wanted a selfie with me, and so I said, okay. And so he put his selfie stick together, and we pop it. And this guy's a mechanic. He teaches other people in his home country over in Africa how to fix electric and hybrid vehicles and all. There's not much that this guy don't know. He's one of the sharpest people on the planet as far as to fix just about anything, you know. My wife was telling me when I took a picture of this PT model truck, my daddy had one of these that he bought for like $50 whenever he came back from I'm sorry, he didn't come back from World War II, he came back, yeah, and he bought one of these and he drove it for a long time. And I showed the picture to my wife, and she said, I don't think that's big enough for a man to get into. And so I stood next to it, my lunch partner, and this was at that same country store, while my lunch partner took a picture of me standing next to it so she could get a perspective on, you know, the size of next to a person and all. But that is one cool old truck. This was when I was at the Ford plant in the 1980s, and this was David. He was my service advisor and a good buddy of mine. We used to have lunch every day, and you can tell I was kind of out right there and tired and wasn't really in the mood to have a picture taken. I think his wife took this picture, and this one here was a clip, you know, still photo from a news report that this lady had come over there to do 2 or 3 news reports. One of them wanted me to talk about oxides of nitrogen because nobody else in that beyond would talk to them about it. So I talked to them about oxides of nitrogen for about 5 minutes, and they used about 5 words, I said, which is fine. But you can see the SBDS machine over here and all that. That was basically a posed photo for the lady that was doing the cameraman took a picture of me working on a car.
The best service. Here at Bondi's, we're dedicated to making this a better place with kindness, courtesy, respect, cleanliness, and a thoughtful attitude toward others. Each customer will know with each visit that every employee, using tools of honesty, sincerity, and dedication, is willing to be there for them and do everything possible to assure that customer of total satisfaction.
Bondi's Ford, Chicago.
I had written the customer handling vision statement, and I had also written the employee relations statement or whatever, and those were posted in place. And when we presented those, I got out there and made a little speech to the 140 people at the dealership. And the first guy you saw in the video was the chief manager, and he said, I want you to do a commercial for the service department. And even though I was saying words that I had written for those two, for, you know, the customer handling statement, it took 45 minutes to get that right under those hot lights. And I was thinking, you know, making a commercial nearly as easy as it seemed like it would be, because they had to do it. And I was kind of tired and punchy at that goofy big smile that I gave. And that was what they were looking for, was for you to be bigger than life and all that kind of stuff. But that commercial I thought was, you know, pretty humorous. Not real clear because it's an old copy of it, but I had this sleeper bug. The Volkswagen, horizontal opposed Volkswagen air-cooled bug engine has got a compression ratio of about 5 to 1. And the reason the compression ratio is only about 5 to 1 is because they wanted to use that crummy gas that they had back in the day. You know, this was a car that Ferdinand Porsche came up with. This was a 8 model, and it was one of my favorite old bugs. I must have owned about 15 bugs or more, because Dad had a bug shop. You know, there was always bugs coming through there that people didn't want to pay to get fixed. He'd buy them for 50, he'd slam an engine in there, and I'd drive it a while, you know. But this particular one, the owner had resurfacing tool, and he took 125 thousandths off of the cylinder head on all the cylinders. And when he put that thing together, man, it had a really high compression. Of course, this 58 model was 6 volt, and I had converted it to 12 volt, but the starter had to remain 6 volt because you couldn't make a 12 volt starter fit that, you know. Anyway, one way or another, as 12-volt starter wouldn't fit, but the 6-volt starter just spins twice as fast. And it kind of needed that for all that extra compression. And I drove that thing to New Orleans and all over the place, and it would really fly. And one day I was driving through New Orleans to Port Arthur, Texas, because I was working down there at the time. And I cut out the dash, you know, where the two knobs are above the radio, and I had an oil pressure gauge and an amp meter on there. And I also had replaced the speedometer with a one out of a Type 3 Volkswagen, so I could have more speed showing on the speedometer than 80 miles an hour or whatever it was. So along this guy on this Jaguar comes by looking at me like I'm a termite, because this car looked like crud, you know. And so he looks at me with his beard and his glasses, and he goes on by, and then he gets caught up in traffic, and I around him. He passed me 2 or 3 times like that. And the last time, and he looked at me every time like I'm a termite. Well, so the last time, I slammed that thing up in a higher gear, and I ran him like a rocket. That thing would fly. I mean, it was a sleeper. It didn't even have dual port heads. Boy, would it scream. And I used it to hunt, you know, possum hunting and all kinds of stuff, and sitting on top of it right there. And that was going to be 1970, I guess, or something like that. But that car was one of my favorite. That's the first year they put the big window in the back. And when I first got this car, it had originally come from Germany because it had these little funky things that would flip these pointers out for your turn signals, which was a European thing. I uncovered a skip on Dad's Grand Marquis. I think I know about this. I got this probe from aetools.us, and you just rest it on top of the coil, and this pattern. And this one had a misfire, and number 5 gave me a pattern. You see that pattern right there? And then after I replaced the coil, I got the pattern and the skip was gone. So that was a fairly simple slide. This is alcohol content testing. You can get any kind of a container. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and you just make 10 even divisions in it. Now you can actually get containers that are set up for this, but it's straight now. It can't be tapered or nothing like that. I use rain gauges that I for a couple of dollars from when I was teaching the students how to do that. And I mix some alcohol with fuel and make some, you know, fuel and alcohol mix. And you put gas in there, then you fill it the rest of the way up to the 10 mark with water, and then you get up and let it sit. And the amount of water you gain, which is the water will leave the gas and go to the alcohol, and it'll look like you're getting more water. You'll find out what your percent alcohol is. Now the pump that you see out here, just try this if you have time to fool with it. You'd be able to check the alcohol content anyway. Some people put E85 in one that's not made to run it. Get some gas samples from, you know, when you gas up your vehicle first place and then the other, and say separate from one another, and measure and see how much alcohol is in that gas. I'm talking that, you know, just a regular gas out of the pump, it says contains 10% ethanol and all. You'd be surprised gas doesn't have any ethanol in it. That's what I've discovered, by the way. So resistance, voltage drop, and oxidation will change the color and increase resistance. It's a situation. The more it oxidizes, the more resistance it has, the more heat it makes. The more heat it makes, the more it cooks and burns things. And so it happened here. Now, what will happen sometimes is that will cause a thing. You know, you can say, well, this could be these crimp did this, but what really happened here was nut was not properly torqued. It was tightened, but not enough. So it was just loose enough. It was touching enough to where it was charging, but it was enough so that it cooked this. It got this really, really, really hot. You see the heat, it got here, and then the heat started traveling back up that wire, and that was a disaster. And this really, what we needed to do on this one, what we wound up doing was taking the alternator, replacing this post, and I actually got one of these from another alternator that's in, and I put all of that back together with a new nut and got it all polished up and clean and everything. But anytime on alternators, sometimes whenever people are working on them that really don't know what they're doing, they won't properly torque this nut, or they'll just screw it on there with their fingers to tighten it, and this kind of thing happens. I've seen that on a brand new Jeep that came from and it was so bad it bouncing around making those welding sparks that it burst off. And the post was basically welded to the terminal. There's another story behind that whole thing, but I'll talk to her. After you fix the threads, I had a van I was fixing the threads on. 14 millimeter quarter thread pitch is what the normal spark plugs are nowadays. Grease on the spark plug tap or put air blowing in the intake, in the throttle body, valve open on the cylinder you're working on so the air will come out the spark plug hole. Dad taught me that long ago. And run the tap down in there and make sure that none of those fouling, from when you're tapping it. This one here, threads were kind of screwed up. It did not need a what you'd call a bushing in there, or what they call a helical or anything. It basically just needed the threads chased, and so I chased that 14 millimeter tap in and out a few times, and then I put the plugs down in there, but I didn't know for the way it felt if it was going all the way down. If it doesn't go all the way down, this whole seat is made to carry heat out of the spark plug. You don't want the spark plug overheating because you didn't take it away, because this seat's really important. And so I put some Prussian, this Prussian blue stuff is what you buy from the parts store. Permatex makes it Prussian blue, and it has you can tell you use it on valves too. When you're doing a valve job, make sure when you're just checking to see if the valves are seating right. In fact, there's other stuff, gears and whatnot. You can use this. That's what this is basically sold to, so you can tell what kind of contact you've got between two pieces of metal. That Prussian blue told me that it was going all the way down. I smeared some of that on there, tightened it down, went all the way down. Good to go. I've shown that picture before, but I wanted to touch on it again. This happened on my pickup. I was going over there. I had a trip at the eye doctor to get glasses and all, and I went over there. Halfway to the eye doctor, I lost my alternator and my power steering. And so I went over to the eye doctor, fighting the steering wheel on my turns and all that. Pulled in there and opened it up. The power steering pulley had popped right in the middle, right around. And the belt, of course, it was just thrown around. So I took the belt out of there, got it out from under there, and I drove the thing home, with no alternator working. Now, I wasn't but about 3 or 4 in the place where I was going. And I went and bought a pulley for $66, and it was Chinese-made pulleys. And whenever I used my tool, I had a brand new pump tool, pulley tool, and when I pressed that thing on there, it would not press on there. Well, I was kind of pressed for time, so it had like 1/8 of an inch of gap or whatever. In other words, this got to be flush right here. Well, this was about 1/8 of an inch out, and it was important, but I went ahead and threw the belt back on it, and I drove it for a little while like that, and the belt was making tick 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 noises and all that kind of stuff, and it was trying to come apart because this pulley wasn't lined up. I kind of knew that was liable to happen, so I went ahead and took the power steering pump off. Well, I took the pulley back off and I ran a 2-rock hone through it, trying to hone it out a little bit. Them Chinese made pulleys are just a little bit too tight, and I've seen more. And so I took that pulled the pump completely off, took the pump off, and I carried the pump over there to the vise, used the tool to press it on there as far as it would press it. It would get to a point where it just stopped, like it was stalled out again. And I said, well, I'm going to have to do something. So I put it in my vise. I got a really good Wilts that I bought new back in 1979 for like $54. And I've still, I got it on my bench out here in the garage. Anyway, that thing, I pressed that thing on there now by just putting the power steering pump in the vise and pressing against the pulley. It got all the way on there. And so now I'm, driving with the nice new pulley and all that kind of thing. But I made him give me another pulley because this thing's too tight. So, I got another pulley from him under warranty. Needed to answer for that. But that was an ordeal. Dad told me whenever this is Dad standing in front of a Renault. He owned several of these when he had his shop in the early 60s. Not long after he opened his shop, he said, you get one of these Renaults, so whenever they're new, you're driving it, and you're thinking, it's wonderful, it's just what I need. And then he says, and a year later, it's falling apart. And he would buy one of these, all kinds of engine problems, for like, $100, and then it had liners in the engine, wet liners and all. And it was just oddball little car, and he would buy one, build a motor and sell it for a profit. Well, I worked on these Renaults back in one of the earlier because it's got this module, it's got this vacuum diaphragm and all that hogwash, and then some of them had this module back here. It depends on whether it's an Encore. You know, when we had the dealership, bought the Jeep Renault, I had to go to school on these things. And one day there was the chin behind this thing, and where the wire's plugged into it, if you mashed the potting, that pot soft, with your fingers, and it killed the engine, you'd know that connection had gone inside that module. And I had one that came in there, and the guy said, well, it's quick when it gets hot. And so at school we were taught to test it that way. So I, you know, read them underneath the module when it was running, and I pressed it and it killed it. And I said, well, this is what they told us. And so I went ahead and replaced the module on it, test drove it, seemed like it was okay. And the guy came back and he says, I think y'all were just guessing. I said, well, no, I did it correctly. And he said, well, I'm still having the same problem. So I drove this thing, hooked up my meter to the crank sensor, and I drove it. And I noticed after I drove it for 45 minutes and got it really, really, really hot, the crank sensor opened up, and I could tell because I lost voltage, lost AC voltage with the meter. So I had to put him a crank sensor on there. But he first got this $140 module. But see, this is a catch-22 situation. Had done the crank sensor and the module died, we would have had to eat the module. See what I know? I mean, there's just all kinds of situations going on there. The dealership where I worked was really, they would give away parts if there was any idea at all. One time this lady called from Pensacola, and she had an ear, and she said it's quitting or it won't start or something. I remember what the deal was. So it had some kind of a problem. It sounded ignition related, and she asked me, or she had the mechanic to ask me, what do you think it might be? And I said, well, if I had to guess at it, it would be that ignition module, coil assembly, or crank sensor. Well, the crank sensor was what it was because I was talking to this guy on the phone that I didn't even know in Pensacola. I told ignition or crank sensor. He put that $100 ignition module on there, and that would be the crank sensor on that one. But based on the fact that they talked to me on the phone and they checked the module, because they talked to me on the phone, they came up there whining about that, and the man gave them the money back for the module because I had talked to the guy on the phone. They just beat all of it. You know, I talked to a lot of people on the phone, never had that problem. Talked to one person in North Africa that called and helped them get it started, you know. That was about the farthest phone call I ever took. This was Tony, that was in my automotive program. And this guy got really, really good at building automatic transmissions. And he was doing them at home and making extra money and all that. And he was just sharp. You can see he had one torn apart right there whenever I was training him. I'd have him tear and pull the valve bodies down, all that kind of stuff. And he got this guy from a local small town over here called and says, can you see somebody? I said, well, I got a guy that, you know, can work in the afternoons over there, and he's pretty sharp. And so I sent Tony over there, and Tony told me, he said, as soon as he got there, those people told him, they said, you are not going to be here. And he said, what are you talking about? He says, well, most of the guys in here in the shop are these work release convicts, and he can work them for minimum wage. And one of them, his best one, you know, broke his probation and got sent back to jail. And that guy's only going to be in jail for about 3 weeks before they let him go again. And when they let him go, he's going to hire that guy back, and you're going to be gone. And so Tony told me that. And so we did. And 3 weeks later, when that guy came back in there, they told him that's the guy talking about. And the service manager says, well, we don't need you anymore. And he sent Tony packing. And I know Tony was able to do the work because Tony could do anything. He was attacked. And so I told that guy, I said, what was the problem with Tony? He said, oh, well, he just really didn't know what he was doing. And I know better than that. And that's hogwash. And so anyway, that knothead called me again about 18 months later, want me to send him somebody else. And I said, you still working them convicts? Because if you are, you anybody else, this is ridiculous. You know, oh no, you know, he got all huffy and mad about that. But tragically enough, Tony, not long after he graduated from my program, he got killed in a crash. You know, I hated to hear about that because he was really a good guy, and I really liked him, and he was me too. Identify this part. You know what that is? If you know what that is, then see it just got this going to it, and it's just hanging there in empty space. You know, what in the world is that good for anyway? I think I'm going to leave you guys in suspense this time. Some of you will know what it is. If you know what it is, put something in the comments about it. This was a refrigerator that we had. Originally it was an old one. It was kind of rusty and all. And so I had my students sand it off, and I got some of this red toolbox, and we painted it red. You know, we masked off the handles and all so it would look nice. And there was a toolbox that we had that the Craftsman badge had fallen off of, and so I took that Craftsman badge, double-sided trim tape, and put that. It looked like we had a Craftsman refrigerator. A guy from the local news station came over to interview me one day, and he wanted to talk about this Craftsman refrigerator, you know. All right, the year's 2038. You got to get one of these barn finds going and drive it 1,000 miles and die. Which one are you going to pick? All right, I'm just going to leave that. That's an apocalypse hypothetical. Let me know which one you would work on and which one you would get going to take you 100 miles. 10 millimeter, gone but not forgotten. I saw this tattoo posted on one of the Facebook pages. I thought it was all get out. How many of us, if you have never lost a 10 millimeter socket, then you ain't been mechanicking very long. Or you're a totally in person if you've never lost a 10 millimeter. And I used to have all kinds with my 10 millimeter getting gone. The 10, the 15, the 13. You know, usually the 10 seem to be the ones I had the most trouble with, you know. But anyway, well, that's the end of this one. We're about 30 minutes, and I'm sending y'all off to have a great week. And hey, be out there, and I'll see you next time.